Καλημέρα και καλό μήνα σε όλους σας. Θέλω αρχικά να σας ευχαριστήσω όλους για το χρόνο σας και που είστε εδώ σήμερα. Αυτή είναι η πρώτη φορά που φέρνουμε το Digital Growth Program στην Ελλάδα και ελπίζουμε να σας φανούν χρήσιμες και ευχάριστες αυτές τις συνεδρίες, καθώς τις έχουμε προσαρμόσει με βάση τις απαντήσεις σας στις φόρμες που σας είχαμε στείλει. Η ομάδα του Digital Growth Program προσπαθεί πάντα να προσαρμόσει και να χτίσει αυτές τις εκπαιδεύσεις με βάση τις δικές σας ανάγκες, γι' αυτό και κάθε σχόλιο ή feedback που θέλετε να μοιραστείτε μετά μαζί μας θα είναι πολύ πολύτιμο. Και πάλι θα θέλαμε να σας ευχαριστήσουμε για τη συμμετοχή σας και ευχόμαστε να σας αρέσει το webinar που θα ακολουθήσει. Καλή συνέχεια και enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much, Elena, for that lovely introduction. We are going to get started. So you might be wondering, who is your speaker here today? My name is Lena, and I've worked with a number of organizations from all around the world and have 20 years of experience specializing in digital marketing. And I've actually worked with a number of media companies as well. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce my moderator, Rami. Rami is going to be on the background, and they'll be helping us along with all of the different links and all of the different tips and information that I will be sharing here today. So let's get started. We have a number of sessions. We have 3 sessions that we are going to be running here today. They're all the sessions in the red. I know there's a lot of information on this particular slide. So I'd like for you to focus on the sessions on the red. And we're going to be focusing with the first one that is actually there highlighted. So some of the really, really helpful tips, how can we get the most out of this training? What we're here to do is that we are here to give you options. We are here to give you all of the different options that are available to you. And it is important to say that it is entirely up to you how you're going to be putting those options into action. So we're going to share a number of tips and tools and resources, and then we'll show you all the different case studies and all of the actions and the resources, and those are options and suggestions that you can actually go ahead and adjust according to your needs. So this particular session, it does revolve around the fact that money is in fact being left on the table. There is a staggering 79% of publishers who are in fact missing out on the monetization potential of all the different types of advertising, which is a massive, massive percentage. So essentially, what is the focus of the session? What is the agenda of the session? Having looked at that staggering 79% that is left behind, what we're going to talk about is 3 specific topics. We are going to focus on the first topic, which is all about the ad inventory optimization. Essentially, we're going to walk you through all of the different ways that we can optimize for advertising. The second topic in our agenda is going to be all about increasing ad viewability. Essentially, we are going to look at any number of metrics, helpful metrics, and which are going to help us the success of the overall advertising and making sure how we are actually getting those views. The third topic is going to be all about lost revenue. Essentially, we are going to give you some tips, some tools, some techniques, some resources that are actually going to help you get started. And keep in mind, those are all options and suggestions. It's entirely up to you to put them into action. So let's kick things off with our very first topic, introducing fluctuation in essentially ad inventory optimization. Now, fluctuations essentially in ad revenue, they are to be expected. In spite of all of our best efforts, it does actually take place. It does happen. This could happen because of any number of different reasons. And essentially in this section, what we're going to be looking at is all of the different elements that might in fact impact ad revenue. So we're going to get started with the ad revenue fluctuation. Because of all of the changes that happen in the seasons, essentially seasonality, they can have actually a change in demand from advertisers. And this might in fact have a direct impact on our potential revenue. So with all of those seasonal changes, which in fact may depend on each and every one of our particular niche that we might have, it can actually be helpful to think about our particular niche and our particular content, and essentially to consider How is it that seasonality can, in fact, be a factor and play an influence in what we do? So more and bigger, essentially, ads, they don't necessarily mean more revenue. There is a number of metrics that we can be looking at that can actually have a factor. So populating essentially our web page with too many ads, it may in fact have a negative consequence on the overall user experience, on the reader experience on our particular site. And it might actually potentially affect any number of key metrics, such as bounce rate, such as effective cost per milli, CPM, as well as our PM, so revenue per page per milli. So we need to be thinking essentially about the size of the ad units and how many ad units we are going to be placing. AdSense tends to recommend publishers to limit themselves to only placing 3 ad units for every single page. So that's something that we might want to consider. We might come across publishers that might be adding more than the recommended limit, and they're trying to potentially essentially increase and generate more revenue per impression. But that could be something that we might potentially want to consider and think about. Some of the other things that we also want to consider is essentially choosing the most effective ad sizes. Finding that right balance between essentially the ad sizes that our content, that our reader are going to resonate with, and making sure that we're optimally placing and offering the highest CPM ad sizes. So essentially, when we are looking at all of the different ad formats, we want to zero in on the most profitable ad sizes for our particular website. And, that could be a difficult task. There isn't sort of a one size fits all for everyone. So a very helpful starting point, it would be to essentially determine the most appropriate ad slot locations on our pages, as well as defining which one of those ad slots we are going to be selling at a premium rate, and which we might consider as secondary units for essentially lower market prices. So what is a really, really helpful tool, right? So we talked about a couple different types essentially of ways that we can go out there and utilize this information. Testing, and then testing some more. Like I said, there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't a right or wrong. We really need to go ahead and to test to essentially find out what works better, and how we can learn and improve. So it is recommended that publishers that they do experiment with a wide variety of ad sizes and ad units. And how do we go about doing that? We can actually do that by conducting A/B testing, which can actually help us uncover all of those very, very valuable conclusions about our specific website, about our specific page, and the behavior that our readers have when they're there. So can actually source essentially all of that information through the experiments, through data that can really remove that intuition, that gut feel, and really actually focus in on decisions that are actually based on measurement and facts. So it's a really, really helpful tool. So what are some of the new opportunities that we could explore? So as we are going to be, continuing with our content, continuing with our presentation, I want you to focus in, out of all of these different tools, what are some of the opportunities that we are going to write down and actually execute and put into action after this particular session? So introducing essentially all of these different opportunities and experiments inside the Google Ad Manager. So what are these opportunities and experiments? Essentially customized to our specific account. Opportunities are weekly suggestions on how we can go out there and earn more revenue and actually unblock a general category, or essentially adding potentially a new ad format. We can view the projected revenue impact and then decide whether we want to implement the suggested change. And essentially, most of these changes can actually be implemented with one click. So they're literally, at times one click away. Now, with experiments essentially, they're going to let the actual network traffic to test out essentially how we can apply an opportunity that will have a direct impact on revenue. So we can set essentially a fixed impression on the traffic percentage, and we can see, okay, so how does that perform? How does this change perform compared to the rest of our traffic? So what are some of the opportunities that could potentially be on offer? A couple of suggestions would be, simple implementations that we can literally, they're a click away, we can apply with just a single click. Another potential opportunity, it could be accurate uplift metrics that are essentially based on our actual account data. And this option is available in Google Ads Manager. And I'm going to call on our amazing moderator to actually share that resource. So Rami is going to be sharing that resource with us right in the chat. So you can click on that link, leave that open in another tab, and then we'll continue with the rest of our content. So in terms of, how can we take all of these opportunities and action them and essentially, opt in? All of these new opportunities, they will appear in our account on a weekly basis, so very much on a regular basis. So we should see these opportunities, they're going to come up on our account typically every Monday and every Thursday, so on a weekly basis, and within that, those two specific days. Now, it is advised that we do check for those insights, for that insights card right on our homepage, and then essentially, we go in, we click into that opportunity tab on a regular ongoing basis and actually see what are the opportunities that are available to us. We can also opt in essentially to receive weekly emails, right? Those notifications that come right to our inbox. And now we can see those opportunities, we can be alerted to those. So this option is also available in the Google Ads Manager. And again, our amazing moderator, Rami, is going to be sharing specifically some links with us. So click on that link and go to that page. Leave that open for now, because we still have quite a bit of information to take you through. So we talked about our very, very first topic. Now we're going to kick things off with our first topic, essentially all about increasing ad viewability. We previously discussed that it is important to increase viewability. Now let's actually go in and zoom in and look at how we can go about increasing the viewability. So ad viewability. What is it again? Let's go through a bit of a definition. It's essentially an impression that is considered viewable when it has appeared in a user's browser and has the opportunity to be seen, right? So viewability essentially is a measure of how many of our impressions are in fact viewable. An impression is considered viewable when it has appeared with a user's browser and it has the potential to be seen. Active view reporting, it essentially is data that is going to inform on the number of viewable impressions that our site has in fact generated. Ad viewability, it does play an important role in the overall performance of our website as well as our overall business, because essentially it is very, very tightly connected and linked to revenue. So increasing it can in fact have a result in much better ROL. So for publishers in particular, viewability has always remained one of those very, very hot, important topics. So a low viewability rating essentially suggests that there might be some opportunity essentially to adapt the ad positions. So let's look into some of the best practices that we can actually put in place as publishers to essentially better enhance the ad viewability and increase the overall revenue. And we do have some insights that Romy is going to be sharing with us from the interactive IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau. And again, Romy is going to be sharing with us that link with more information. So improving our viewability and overall growing our revenue. So the impact of improving our viewability, on average, 58, so that's 58% of impressions are not seen. And buyers will essentially, they'll filter out all of those unviewed impressions. So viewability can in fact help us increase our overall revenue. So as advertisers, we can actually see our viewability rate for each and every individual ad unit, and we might make bidding decisions that are going to be based on those specific rates. So currently there is an increase in overall demand for viewability impressions, and publishers with essentially higher viewability rates that will see more demand for their particular inventory. So based on that analysis, we can see that click-through rate and CPMs have a very strong correlation. So this is essentially further reinforced by a positive correlation viewability as well as the CPM. So in other words, what does this mean? In other words, increasing our viewability, it would most likely increase our CPMs as well. Typically, what we see from research is a publisher is able to increase the viewability just by 1%, and they can see an uplift of 2% in their CPMs. So this can be very, very helpful. Obviously, more analysis, has found that this inventory with a predicted probability greater than 50%, so an overall 26% higher CPMs than the inventory with essentially less than 50% predicted probability that is being viewable. So it can significantly increase our CPMs, and that's something that we should absolutely consider. And I'm going to call on Rami to share with us some very, very helpful links and resources. Again, we're giving you all of the different tools and resources. So, are we maximizing viewability? I want you to think about that. Is that something that we're very confident in, that we're very, very strong, that yes, we do in fact make the best of it? So viewability checklist, right? So we're sort of saying, yes, maybe we're not sure. So what is a checklist that can help us answer whether or not we're maximizing viewability? Essentially, there's a number of considerations that can help us improve our visibility, and those are content, speed, design, sizes, placement, as well as stickiness. So let's look at that information in more detail. So our primary aim essentially is to create captivating content that will hold those viewers' attention. So choosing the content in the categories that hold viewers' attention, this is essentially the very, very heart and center of a successful site and a very successful app at that as well. So essentially, Google can run a report that is called the state of ad viewability, and it has found that all of those different content categories that are going to be holding viewers' attention, things like games and art and entertainment and shopping, they do tend to have much higher viewability. And it does suggest a higher interest from an advertising perspective as well in those content categories. So for those reasons, it is worth putting some thought into specifically the content that we are going to be creating. Now, increasing our page speed, so improving our essentially the speed of our page, the speed of our app, it can in fact help content as well as advertising to load up more quickly. So increasing the overall speed at which our ads essentially load up can in fact dramatically increase the overall viewability of our ad inventory. So in other words, when the ads actually load faster, people are less likely to leave our pages, and essentially they're less likely not to be viewing our ads as well. So what are some of the tools that we can utilize? We can try the page speed insights. We can use the AMP format. We can try the app speed reports. We can also implement lazy loading, as well as minimizing passbacks. So a number of tools and a number of resources that we can actually utilize. Now, building responsive designs is really, really helpful and very, very important. Essentially, they can provide that user experience that is going to be enhanced, that is going to be better. So when people are looking and they're watching our content, essentially, they have a much, much better experience. So building responsive designs right into our website, right into our apps, it can really help provide a greater experience no matter where someone is actually watching that content. So as people spend more and more time on our mobiles, this is an imaginary mobile, essentially, maybe that's something that we need to continue to optimize with our overall designs. In fact, a recent report that was run by Google, it revealed that ad viewability is significantly higher on those mobile devices as compared to tablet and desktop. So using the right ad sizes, it is recommended that we use the ad sizes that essentially have those higher viewability rates. So vertical ads, they are the most viewable and they do stay on screen for the longest amount of time. So while above the fold tends to have sort of those lower viewability rates on average, typically below the fold ads, they still have significant viewability rates. So as we continue to increase our viewability rates, just keep that in mind that, a reach point of diminishing returns, if we actually are past the threshold of anywhere between 70 to 75% viewability. So that's something to remember, and that's something to keep in mind. So this can be triggered essentially by pages that have multiple high viewability units right on the same page. So it's like the user sort of confused, which one of these should I be clicking on? Another thing to consider is placing ads essentially where viewers are in fact looking. So essentially, it is important to take the time to understand specifically the user behavior, to identify where do viewers actually spend most of their time on our site, and placing those ads in those specific sections. So for example, some of the most viewable ad positions, they typically tend to be, right above the fold and not on the top of the page. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should rule out below the fold ads at the same time. In fact, 47% of display ads are viewable below the fold. So consider identifying where is it that viewers are essentially spending their time on certain pages and placing those ad units specifically on those locations. So this is something that we can test out by essentially conducting that A/B test that we talked about earlier and moving those ad units on higher up the website or in different positions to actually understand, how is it that essentially the viewability rate changes is going to impact our overall advertising. Another tool that we can utilize is essentially using sticky ads and anchor ads. When we're using sticky ads essentially and anchor ads, we can essentially improve our overall viewability. You see, all of this is all centered around viewability, whether it's on our website or whether it's on our apps or our mobile inventory. So sticky ads, they are essentially on the right rail of our page, and they don't move out of the view even as the user is scrolling through. So using these ads on our web inventory, it can actually boost the overall viewability. Anchor ads, they have very similar functionality as the sticky ads, but stay on the bottom of the page rather than on the side of the page. And it is recommended that we use these ads on our overall mobile inventory. So some really, really helpful tools and suggestions that we could potentially utilize. So our viewability toolkit, right? So optimizing our viewability by essentially aiming for a viewability rate of at least 70%, so that's 70 or higher for our top performing ad units. So what are some practices that can help us essentially get there? We can reduce the overall page length. So one fold means essentially less scrolling, right? And essentially more viewable ads. If we have longer form content, we can enable that infinite scroll as well. Now, focusing in on position, that's another practice that we could utilize. So the most viewable position for an ad unit is right above the fold, to have at least, so we can aim to have at least one unit there. Using the right ad sizes, that's another tool that we could potentially utilize. So the most viewable ad sizes, they tend to be vertical. So for instance, 160 by 600. So creating content essentially that users are actually is going to grab their attention, is going to keep them there, and increasing the overall page speed. So essentially sites that load faster have much higher viewability, and Google's mobile web speed toolkit can in fact help us with the site speed. So recovering lost revenue from users with ad blockers. What are ad blockers again? Essentially, ad blockers, they're sometimes also known as content blockers as well. It's simple software programs that prevent ads from being shown on websites. So ad blockers, they're typically add-ons that people add on their browsers, and they are available on Chrome and on Firefox and on Safari and on Opera, as well as IE Internet Explorer. So essentially, 30% of internet users, they do now use ad blockers. So you might be thinking, okay, so what's the problem? So according to research, right, that 30% of those internet users that use ad blockers, they can be problematic for us, for publishers, who are essentially trying to maximize the overall returns of our overall content. Now, keep in mind though that all might not be quite as bad as it seems or as it sounds. So not everyone blocks all of those ads. So for instance, do our readers, so that's something to consider, do our readers know whether or not actually are blocking? So do you know that whether or not your readers are actually blocking and using those ad blockers, right? So 50% of users, they have allowed essentially ads to show at least on one site. So this is what we know from statistics. And 54% of users, they do not know when the term whitelist means. So essentially, might not actually be quite as bad as it sounds. So introducing essentially funding choices. This is a tool to identify where visitors who are in fact using an ad blocker and ask them to specifically whitelist our overall site. So funding choices is a tool, again, that could be something that we might want to utilize to identify whether or not people are actually blocking our ads or not. It is an easy to use messaging tool that can essentially help us to communicate with users and to get that greater control and to gather that consent, or people can actually opt out as well, as it does follow the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, as well as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. It can essentially help us with that and to recover that those users that might potentially want to block out and utilize that those ad blockers. So gathering consent seamlessly, right? So we sort of touched on gathering consent. So funding choices is approved by the IAB, so the Interactive Advertising Bureau, which is essentially Europe's transparency and consent framework. And this solution is in fact essentially approved by the IAB. Now, another thing to consider, right? So as we're going to continue with our content, what we're doing is going to essentially be necessary to win back any lost revenue. So as we're going through all of this content, I want you to really zero in, write those tools down, and also consider what are some of the items that we are specifically going to be utilizing, that we are going to put into action, that we might try out, test out. So I want you to be thinking about those. So getting started with those funding choices. So essentially, it's a 3-step process, right? We detect, the very first part of the process, essentially realizing, okay, are people using ad blockers, and what is that ad blocking rate? Essentially, to go out there and to track the ad blocking rates, we can use any solution such as the Google funding choices, and really understand and zero in, do people actually use ad blockers that come to our website? So we can use news tagging guide to enable the NCI as well, to visualize essentially the percentage of users with an ad blocker that is enabled, that is turned on. And this can be very, very helpful to inform our overall messaging strategy, to essentially understand the lay of the law. Where is it that we're at this point in time? The second step in that process, in essentially understanding and getting started with the funding choices, is all about explanation. So communicating the overall values, essentially, of ads, and to highlight the value that in fact ads do provide to our specific organization, and to let users know why they are worth in fact supporting. The third step in this process, in enabling and enacting the funding choices, is all about asking, right? Offering our readers the choice, to essentially, so offering people to the choice with the readers' Google funding choices, to essentially enable and to decide what users can do, and the alternatives that they do have access to. So a number of different tools and a number of different steps that we could potentially utilize. We do have a case study, right? So this is a case study from BroadwayWorld.com that actually saw an increase in revenue by 35% by zeroing in and focusing on that ad optimization. And essentially, BroadwayWorld.com, they increased the overall revenue per visitor using Azoic's machine learning and the Google Ad Manager. The overall results, they were fantastic results. They increased the revenue per session by more than 35%. And in case you're wondering, this particular organization, BroadwayWorld.com, is a premier New York-based entertainment publisher. They have over 5 million monthly visitors, and they were looking out for new techniques to expand their overall revenue growth and to enhance the visitor experience. Previously, the president had leveraged the direct brand deals in Google's Ad Manager as a primary source of overall monetization, and then the team essentially wanted to explore different ways that they could actually increase revenue and essentially apply data to all of the visitors and segment and personalize the messaging. They essentially decided to utilize Azoic, which is a Google certified publishing partner, and to scale up all of the different experiments and essentially to manage the overall progress of all these different goals. So they were really, really intrigued. This particular company, Broadway.com, they were essentially intrigued by Azoic's technology as well as the opportunity to optimize and to balance out both programmatic revenue alongside all of the different experiences. So a case study of sort of some examples and some of the tools that we could potentially utilize as well. So bringing all of this together, a summary, if you will, of all the 3 different topics that we discussed. We talked about ad inventory optimization, and essentially, opting in and utilizing all of the different opportunities. The second topic that we discussed was increase in ad viewability, and essentially we talked about that viewability toolkit, the checklist, and we went through that checklist in detail. And then we talked about recovering that lost revenue, and the tool that we talked about there was funding choices. So a number of different tools and a number of different resources that we actually utilized and we used. So I do see that we do have a number of questions, which is great, which is fantastic. So our very first question comes from one of our participants, and the question is, how would we optimize for viewability? So what are some of the best practices that we can put in place? So I'm going to take you through 4 different best practices. So overall, reducing the page length. So one fold essentially means scrolling and more viewable ads. So if we have longer form content, essentially we can enable that infinite scroll. So focusing on position, that's another tool that we can utilize when it comes to optimize our overall viewability. So the most viewable position on their ad essentially is right above the fold. So try to have at least one unit placed there, utilizing the different types of ad sizes, as well as utilizing Google's mobile web speed toolkit to essentially to test out the site speed and to see what happens. I do see that we have another question. We have a very engaged audience today, which is great. So the second question is, can we explain which of the 2 tests can help to increase speed? Our participant is asking that question. So getting up to speed, how do we do that? So there are 2 tests that essentially can help us when it comes to how we overall stack up. So one test is test my site, which essentially is an easy way for our businesses to measure the overall site performance when it comes to different devices, or on mobile or desktop, on tablet, that we are essentially providing. And it gives us a list, right? A list of sort of our to-do list, our task list of specific fixes that can actually help us out with the overall business. And our amazing moderator Romy is going to be sharing that link with you as well. Now, so another thing another tool that we can also utilize is Web Vitals, which is essentially, it's an initiative by Google to help us provide that unified guidance for the quality of all the different signals that are essential to delivering a fantastic user experience on the overall web. Now, one of the key things that I would love for each and every one of you to share with us is to actually to fill out the feedback form. Feedback is a gift. We take the time to not only read all of the content, but utilize the content and build future new sessions. So the more you share, the more feedback you provide, the better the following sessions are going to be. So feedback is very much a gift. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get your feedback. And I see that our moderator, Romy, has already posted the feedback form, which is fantastic, which is really, really great. So I don't see any other comments or questions. We do actually... we do have a couple more topics that we are going to be covering here today. And we do encourage you to actually to utilize all of the different courses and all of the different sessions that we do have coming up. In fact, we are going to be taking a very, very short break. And the next session that we are going to be covering today is going to be all about ads and data. So we're going to be focusing in on all about ads and data next. And then our third and final session for the day is going to be all about programmatic strategy. So some really, really helpful tools, some really, really helpful information that we do have coming up. Now, overall, continuing with our overall journey, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here, for joining us in this particular session. And we like I said, today we do have a couple more sessions that are coming up. And we cannot stress enough the feedback form. Feedback is very, very important to us. This is essentially how we can learn, how we can improve, how we can essentially build better sessions for you. So thank you so much for joining us, and we do look forward to seeing you in our next session. I see that my local time here in the UK, it's 8:09, so the next session is going to be starting in about 21 minutes. So please do join us for the next session, which is going to be specifically all about ads and data. So we're going to give you some really, really helpful tools, some really, really helpful resources. So do join us for the next session, which essentially is going to be starting in 20 minutes. So we're going to take a short 20-minute break. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you to the next session.